Let me just give you some of the headlines today. Hong Kong descends into chaos again as protesters defy the ban. NBA arenas prepare for protests. Hundreds of thousands take over the streets in Lebanon. New clashes in Chile.
We turn to Canada now, and its hard-fought election is over, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau remains in power, but with a minority government.
Scientists fuse brains with AI implants to give people superhuman intelligence.
This is Sycamore. Google says it's the first quantum computer to achieve supremacy over traditional computing.
I mean, it just goes on and on. Romney may vote to remove Trump.
Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us. We're going to begin with a dramatic sideshow today. At the impeachment inquiry.
A shocking scene today on Capitol Hill, one that some Democrats say resembled a mob and the closest thing to, quote, civil unrest that they have ever seen.
It should be the people of this country who decide who's going to be the president, not Nancy Pelosi and not Adam Schiff in secret behind closed doors.
The millions of Americans that we represent that want to see this Congress working for them and not obsessed with attacking a president who we believe has not done anything to deserve impeachment.
It is a sham, and it's time for it to end.
What is happening here is not fair.
And it's a total political hit job on the President of the United States.
The UN Secretary General has raised the alarm over a major shortfall in the organization's budget. Antonio Guterres has sent a letter to member states urging them to pay up.
We're running out of cash sooner and staying in the red longer, caused primarily by the delayed contributions of member states to the regular budget. This new cash shortfall isn't like those we have experienced previously.
Boris Johnson left Downing Street today ready to present MPs with a new Brexit offer. Agree to a December general election in return for more time to pass a Brexit deal in the Commons.
The way to get Brexit done is, I think, to be reasonable with Parliament and say if they genuinely want more time to study this excellent deal, they can have it, but they have to agree to a general election on December the 12th.
Her Majesty's opposition Labour Party will back an election once no deal is ruled out. And wait for it if the extension allows.
Goes on and on and on. Bad. And it's global. Those don't include the economic headlines that are important. The economic headlines, the Fed has gone back in again for a second round of this thing that no financial expert can even explain. Never happened before. We don't know why the banks are needing these bailouts. They've been having bailouts in the hundreds of trillions of dollars, and we're back at it again, printing money.
But what made them go back to quantitative easing? It was the recent blow up in the swap market, in the market for overnight funds. Well, why is this happening? Well, interest rates started to rise. In fact, short-term rates went as high as maybe 10%. Why doesn't the Fed want to admit that they're doing QE? Well, because they don't want to admit that the economy is in such bad shape that it needs to be rescued with quantitative easing. After all, we did quantitative easing when we had the Great Recession.
But we're operating under the assumption today that the yield curve doesn't matter. Now, the Fed tried to do this thing called quantitative tightening. And Jay Powell repeated Janet Yellen's assurances that it was going to be like watching paint dry, except for the fact that we were blowing up an emerging market every other night via quantitative tightening. Morgan Stanley went back and did some math and found that the yield curve didn't actually invert in May. If you adjust for quantitative tightening, the yield curve inverted in December. So where are we today? Not that I want to spread a conspiracy theory, however. This line in my speech used to be called the New York Fed Recession Probability Index, because that's who invented it. But I've actually had to go to Haver, where they can contrive one, because it's pretty easy. It's a 3-10 spread. Because as of August, the New York Fed has stopped publishing this. Ain't that a thing? But you just don't up and quit publishing something that you've published since the beginning of it. And yet the New York Fed's gone silent. Website's empty. But what we know is that in August of this year, that the line was crossed to 40%. The recession probability hit 41%.
Which side are you on? Are you on the whole, we're looking at a global slowdown, this isn't good, we need fiscal stimulus, or are you of the mind of like, we could be bottoming out here in the PMIs, things could get better?
You know, Liz, I think we're definitely in a slowdown. There's no doubt about that. And it is synchronized across the world economy.
It's a bit more serious. This is not a repeat of 2016 where you can sort of all of a sudden lower cost of capital and get on with things. Yeah. I suspect we are in this synchronized stagnation that takes us a lot closer to what Japan has been going through for many, many decades.
2 years ago, the global economy was in synchronized upswing. Measured by GDP, nearly 75% of the world was accelerating. Today, even more of the world economy is moving in sync. But unfortunately, this time growth is decelerating. To be precise, in 2019, we expect slower growth in nearly 90% of the world.
Now, the global economy is witnessing synchronized slowdown. The effect is more pronounced this year in some of the largest emerging market economies like India. That's what the new International Monetary Fund Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, said. The new IMF chief warned that the widespread deceleration means that growth in 2019-20 will fall to its lowest rate since the beginning of the decade. The IMF chief has also warned that India will be hit hard by the slowdown. Almost 90% of the world will face a slower growth this year.
The International Monetary Fund is no stranger to criticism. In recent months, it's been in the international headlines for all the wrong reasons. But as well as enduring embarrassing personal scandals, the fund has much bigger problems. From across the political spectrum, it's faced accusations of exploitations and favoritism almost since the day it was founded. But in the last 3 years, the global economy has undergone a seismic shift, and the financial world is still reeling. The old divides between North and South have become blurred. Emerging economies and new democracies in the Arab world and elsewhere are taking a look at what the IMF has to offer and are increasingly saying, thanks, but no thanks.
So it's an interesting puzzle that they have to put together. You have 187 countries in the world who are members. They all have vote shares, but then they elect a body of just 24 countries that end up getting seats around the table. And the IMF is an interesting kind of a bind here, because if they reduce the power that advanced industrialized countries like the United States and Western Europe have at the institution, then those countries might be less likely to approve additional funding for the IMF in the future. But on the other hand, if they don't make the governance of the institution more accommodating of the emerging markets, then these countries are going to continue to lose interest in the institution.
Bad news. Bad news is that in advanced economies, productivity has leveled up and doesn't want to move at all. It doesn't move. We cannot generate growth. We don't generate growth. There is no source for yield.
Joy to have you here within such shocking, uncertain times. I think of the establishment of the IMF, the multilateral sense that you've been a part of for decades. Is it gone? Are we leaving behind a multilateral world?
I very much hope that not, because the needs are still there. But what we see here now is a system in which there are great rifts everywhere. A rift between the President of the United States and the Federal Reserve, a rift between the monetary authority and the fiscal authority, a rift within the ECB, a rift between China and the US, a rift. All of this is completely inconsistent with the successful integrated world that the Bretton Woods organization wanted to establish.
Composition of the world economy is changing, right? Because of this, have we realized already? Are central banks realizing the new world order?
The composition of the world economy has changed dramatically. If about 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it was enough to know what happens to the US, Japan, and at the time West Germany. Today, they produce just 1/3 of world output. At the time, they produced 2/3 of world output. Where did it all go? It went to emerging markets, especially in Asia, and therefore the order of the world has changed. And if there is a rift between the US and China, it is now much more important than it was before. But let me come back to the earlier point. The earlier point was that you may find it politically advantageous to be elected on a platform of isolationism. But you cannot change the law of physics and the law of the world. The world is integrated, whether you want it or not. The genie is out of the bottle, and therefore the system must be designed in a way that accommodates and makes use of this interaction. And that's why the internet world and the trade world and the capital markets world, walls will not solve the issue.
As I said, a year ago, we were talking about synchronized growth, and 75% of the global economy was going through that phase. As you heard a couple of days ago, we're now talking about synchronized slowdown by 70% of the global economy. We need to better address unfair trade practices and distortions in the system, including through a WTO system reform.
We will need a set of, or presumably you will need a set of common, lowest common denominator perhaps, but sort of common digital rules to make it, and WTO might be a place, I don't know how realistic that is. How would that look even? Yeah.
So there's 72 countries now that have agreed to begin discussing e-commerce in the WTO. We don't know where that's going to head, but it's an important step forward. The trick with the e-commerce is that there are a lot of enabling environment issues that are not likely to be something you can have a harmonized global treaty about. They're more about, digital payment systems or digital documentation or logistics, facilitating logistics, a range of things where you really need a public-private dialogue, and you need some best practice frameworks. But probably the WTO will handle the principles part of it, kind of a basic level of trade principles, if you will.
Yeah, and the point is, there are never ever any agreements which last forever and they are right forever. So to ask for a level playing field is not wrong. The US says we want to have a level playing field in certain areas, that's true, but other countries should ask the same.
Today, we are also addressing the crucial issue of trade and commerce. We're working closely with our European partners, including Italy, to ensure fair and reciprocal trade. A few days ago, I met with President Juncker of the European Commission. We had a great meeting. Following that meeting, we announced a breakthrough agreement to remove trade barriers and increase United States exports of agriculture, energy, and other goods and services to the European Union. Now is also the perfect time to expand commerce between the United States and Italy. America's booming economy, setting records in so many categories, creates enormous opportunities for investment. Likewise, I recommend investment in Italy. It's a great place with great people.
I spend 1 minute talking about, or actually won't even be that, 20 seconds talking about something I think is really amazing and something we don't talk about enough. As I'm not sure if all of you know, but in March 2020 next year, Italy's major banks, representing 78% of the banking sector, will be using Corda to run interbank reconciliations. And I believe that by October of next year, every single bank in Italy needs to have a Corda node. And there's a lot of Italians here, and I love super Tuscan wine, so I want to stop right there and clap for the Italians. Yeah, baby.
Suppose you live in a society where the political and economic extractive elites have made off with the nation's wealth and treasury. You'd be pretty pissed off. You'd want something that's better than what you currently have. You would want a system that's fair, that's open, that's transparent. You want a system that practices meritocracy. Guess what? Most of the world agrees with you. Most of the world thinks that that's the kind of system we should have. 25 years ago, the Soviet Union, where such political manipulation and economic restriction was practiced to an extreme. The Soviet Union collapsed 25 years ago, and the world celebrated.
Mr. President, I'll give this ball to you, and now the ball is in your court.